But yeah, I mean, I remember like the first couple of meetings, you were just like, man, you can't stop doing sales when you're really busy with projects. And I was like, you don't understand. You don't understand, Marcel. It's too much work. And but you just kept hammering that home, like, hey, you cannot take your foot off the pedal on sales while you're busy. Right. And slowly we kind of carved out the time so that I could keep up with it. Took a while.
This is the Agency Profit Podcast, the podcast for agency owners that want to run a more profitable business that doesn't depend on them. Introducing your host, CEO and co-founder of Parakeeto, Marcel Pettipaw.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I'm very excited about today's episode because it's going to be different than anything we've ever done on the show before. We've got a very special guest, very special to me. He is a long-term client of Parakeeto, an incredible creative director, entrepreneur, the founder of an agency called Gold Front that I've been fortunate enough to get to know very well. And he's here today to share his story of working with us, becoming more profitable, growing a lot. So with all of that, Josh Lowman, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Hi, Marcel. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you. We've talked about Gold Front on the show before. I've, name dropped the organization several times before. We had Liston on, which I'm sure you listened into to talk about what we were doing on the sales side. But this has been a long time coming, a conversation between you and I. But for all of those that are listening that don't have the context, I'd love for you to share a little bit in your own words about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Josh Lowman. I'm the founder and chief creative officer at Gold Front. Gold Front is a category design studio. We're here in San Francisco and strewn about in other locations in America. And we help growth stage startups define and own their own category. And the way that we got into this is that we started as a brand studio, but we were doing this other kind of cool thing called category strategy, and we realized that there was a need to sort of combine brand execution with category creation strategy. And so that's what we do now. And I personally live here in San Francisco with my wife and my daughters and my dog, and I'm happily living and working amongst all of these souls, and just happy to be here.
And I'm happy to have you here because, I've watched a tremendous amount of transformation, both at Gold Front and in you as a leader and an entrepreneur since the time that we met, a little over 3 years ago now. And I think so many people can benefit from hearing about not just the things that we've done right together, but also the things that we had to figure out along the way. And I'm excited to dive into that. I'd love to start with what led you to becoming the entrepreneur that you are today. Well, how did you end up doing your own thing and starting Gold Front?
Well, it's funny because I always wanted to have my own business. When I was 10, I wanted to start my own newspaper for me and the kids in the neighborhood. When I was in high school, I, for a very short time, started a small business where I would help people with their computers. When I was in college, I owned a baseball card business. And so I always wanted to start an agency once I got into kind of the creative and strategy world. But to tell you the truth, I was afraid to. For years and years, I thought, if I do this and it fails, it's going to be humiliating. People will realize that I failed at this thing. And I think that's really what kept me from doing it. So I freelanced. So I've been in the world of sort of branding and strategy and things like that for, I don't know, maybe 26 years. And I didn't start Gold Front until 9 years ago. So, but that whole time I probably wanted to start an agency, but I was a little bit afraid to.
So 9 years ago, you start the agency. And what did those first, 6 years up until we met look like?
Well, it was sort of thrilling and crushing and mediocre and kind of a buffet of every kind of experience. Being here in San Francisco, we had a lot of clients that were very exciting to work for. Google, Facebook, Uber, Slack, a bunch of like really interesting tech and startup companies in the Bay Area. And so I feel very fortunate that I got to do that. I remember there was one time when Slack called us up and said, we have a global media buy. We have this campaign that we've bought all the media for, but we don't have a creative shop to actually make the concepts and the creative for us. And we're like, this sounds great. And they said, okay, the first ad is due in 3 days. It has to go to press in 3 days. And we didn't have an idea. We didn't have artwork. We didn't have anything. And, working on projects like that is like incredibly exciting, especially for a company like Slack 5-6 years ago, where you're like, oh, this is like the coolest thing out. And then, it's also been really, really hard. It's been hard managing people, being a boss, not having enough revenue at times to cover payroll, all of the kind of stress that comes from that. I mean, I kind of feel like for me, I'm somebody who's not that great at having a boss, or not that great in I haven't worked at companies that I've loved like as an employee. And I always felt like, well, maybe I'm just not that great at being an employee. And so that's sort of how I ended up freelancing and becoming a business owner. But boy, it really is a lot of drama and some kind of a lot of sleepless nights and some hard stuff that comes with it all.
But the fact that, like a mentor of mine once told me, all you have to do is figure out how to survive for 5 to 7 years, and then you'll probably be okay. And you'll see a lot of competitors come and go over that time. And it sounds like you figured out how to do that, how to make it work over those times through trials and tribulations, and made it to a point where I guess you decided that you wanted to make some changes. So let's talk through the moment when, you started to get what I think we talked today about being your self-taught MBA, your agency MBA. Yeah. What was the turning point for you, and when did you decide it was time to start digging into the business side of running the creative agency?
Yeah, I think I was like 6 years into this, and I realized that I wasn't fully engaged with the business as an entrepreneur. I was engaged with the business as a creative and as a strategist, and I was really into the work. I was okay at sales. I didn't hate doing sales, but I wasn't creative on the entrepreneurial level. I wasn't trying to figure out what they always say, working in the business or working on the business. And I was working in the business. I wasn't really working on the business. And so I just got to this point where I was like, I need to do this. I need to become more of, I need to take ownership of this thing as an entrepreneur. And so I just started listening to podcasts like crazy, and reading kind of all the books about how to run a company. And so I kind of call that, I got my DIY MBA. And that was about 3 years ago. And during that time, I remember it was in August when it sort of started. And during that time, I listened to a podcast. It was an agency podcast about how to run an agency. And you were the guest on there. And you were talking about this amazing product that you were building at Parakeeto. And it was all about kind of a lot of the things that I really wanted to do. And so immediately after listening to that podcast, I went to the Parakeeto website. I think I filled out one of your forms. It was probably like, a thing where I could get a PDF that tells me about how to, understand my profitability if I put in my email address or whatever. And, I got that thing. And then within the next week or two, I got an email from you.
And here we are, more than 3 years later. And just if you're comfortable getting into it, what did the business look like over those first 6 years or so? Where were we kind of at when we first connected? Okay,
so I think in terms of revenue, I think we were at like 1.4 million at the time.
That was fiscal year 2018. Yeah, 1.4 million was the revenue number.
All right. Yeah. And that was up 30% from the year before. Most of our years, we were growing about 30%. Mm-hmm. And there was just a lot of ups and downs. You know, I was like, oh man, things are amazing. Like, you know, things would be really busy, and I'd be like, we're the next great agency. We're going to crush it. We're going to be in the New York Times. Like, you know, it's just like, oh, we're going to blow up. And then we'd get slow, and I'd take it personally. And I'd be like, we're failures. We're going to go out of business, you know? And, you know, it's really easy to personalize that stuff when things are going well or when things are going bad, to kind of think it really says a lot about you and your value. And that's one of the dangers of owning a business, is that it's really it's kind of almost impossible not to personalize the business and to think that how the business is doing is some reflection on your value as a person. Yeah. And so things were sort of a roller coaster financially, emotionally. And I was very happy with the work that we were doing and very proud of it, but I needed something that was a little bit more stable at the time.
Hey, it's Marcel here, and I want to take a moment to thank you for being a loyal listener of the show. If you're enjoying today's episode, then I want to encourage you to subscribe so you never miss another episode, and be sure to check out some of the other amazing free resources we have at parakeeto.com to help you improve your agency's profitability. We have lots of other content just like this episode, including other detailed blog posts on some of the key topics, and free downloadable resources like the Agency Profitability Toolkit, which has helped hundreds of agencies improve their profitability with checklists, templates, and free training videos to help you install the Agency Profitability Flywheel all on your own. So if you're interested in grabbing that, head over to parakeeto.com and check the show notes as well. So with that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I'll let you get back to the episode. I hope you enjoy it. Cheers. Right. And what was the state? How would you describe the state of the business at that time from an operations and profitability perspective?
Disorganized or non-existent, I would say. Yeah, I wrote down a list of the things that you sort of helped us with. And my list goes sales, operations process, metrics, and profits. And we didn't have any of those things in place. So sales, I had a way of doing sales, and I was doing okay with sales, but I had no consistency with it. When we would get really busy, I wouldn't do anything on sales, and then I'd wait for us to slow down because I didn't feel like I had any time to do anything but project work. Otherwise, when we'd slow down, then I'd start reaching out to people about sales. And same thing with process and operations. Like, we didn't have a set way that we did an SOW. We didn't have a set way that we did an estimate. We weren't really like figuring out how many hours we were spending on projects. So we didn't really have metrics going on. And because we didn't have metrics, we didn't have an idea of the levers that we could pull to become more profitable. And so, yeah, I mean, there were some things that were really working on the creative and sort of strategy side of things. But yeah, I mean, I remember like the first couple of meetings, you were just like, man, you can't stop doing sales when you're really busy with projects. And I was like, you don't understand. You don't understand, Marcel. It's too much work. And but you just kept hammering it at home, like, hey, you cannot take your foot off the pedal on sales while you're busy. Right. And slowly we kind of carved out the time so that I could keep up with it. It took a while.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one of those things that was the first thing I noticed. Of course, when we get under the hood, we look at the numbers, and the utilization curve for Gold Front at that time was just like a roller coaster, right? 150% utilized, down to like 10%, back up to it. It was because when it rained, it poured. When you wanted to go out and find work, you were able to do that. But of course, the nature of sales, as we know, is, you know, there's like a domino effect. You happen to close 3 massive projects that all kick off the same week, and then you go into 2 months of not having anything to do. And that seemed to be the ride that you had been on for a little while. So of course, when you're working 80 hours a week, trying to get the creative work across the line, you know, sales just seems like the last thing you possibly want to do at that time. And that's the kind of the natural handbrake that's built in when, as a founder, you're still doing sales, isn't it? Where psychologically, you know, if this deal closes, if the client wants to work with me, I have to deal with the pain of making that happen. Yeah. And so for all those reasons, you don't follow up, you don't do the business development. Of course not, because it's painful. And then I think we're at a point now where it's this perspective has shifted where it's like, how much more fun is it to sell when you should turn the work away and you actually don't need it? Like, how much more fun is it to show up to a sales call when that's the truth?
Oh yeah. Oh my God. It's a game changer. Yeah. And the other thing that I think I notice that I think is so important here to point out is that there are certain things as the owner of an agency that you need, at least I found that I needed to do for my own health and for the health of the agency, that seemed counterintuitive, seemed like, well, if I do that, that's actually going to be harder on me. And but I did need to do those things. So for example, doing sales while we still have project work, in the short term, that seems like that's crazy. There's no way I have any more time than I could not give any more time to this agency. How could I possibly be doing sales when we're really busy? And I think with a little bit of encouragement or pushing from you, and just knowing that, like, okay, some of the things that are going to be healthy are going to seem counterintuitive at first. It sort of worked out in the long run.
What are some of the other things that were eye-opening for you over, those first few months or years that we worked together?
Well, I mean, some of it is just that you actually had a view of what the whole system should be. And I didn't have that at all. I never did this before. And you had some, seemed like you had some prior experience in this. And actually, I don't really know what your prior experience was because I never really asked you too much. So maybe we can get into that today. But
sure.
But yeah, so for example, there's an SOW. The SOW then connects to an estimate. This is how many hours we think we're going to be spending on it and how much we're charging for those hours. That sets up a project in QuickBooks. That also sets up a project in Harvest. There's a number of different sort of documents that we use to track all of the data of Gold Front that I didn't really have exposure to any of that. So we sort of built that together, but it was mostly just on you saying like, hey, this is how you need to do this. So that was huge. And then once we had that in place, it was metrics. Then you're coming back to me going, hey, I've got some metrics. I've got some measurements that show us like what's going on in your agency. And that was just fascinating to me. So now we're seeing, oh, these projects are like really profitable. And these projects aren't profitable at all. Like maybe we're losing money on these. And to be able to see the difference between those things and use that information to either make changes or just decide, well, we're not going to do projects like that anymore because we're not making money on them. That was huge. Yeah, and I would say sort of where we are now is a lot of those things have stabilized and we're more honing the system and designing for growth now. And it seems so much more mature now than it was 3 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's been an iterative process. And, to come back to your point earlier, like we were really at the beginning, and I was really at the beginning of like doing this as a consultant at that time. And so a lot of my ideas have developed, in conjunction with working with you. And that's been a really fun ride. And I'm sure you've seen the evolution of our thinking over that time as well.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the things that you shared that is important and needs to be said is like figuring out some of this stuff, like what is the right structure for an SOW or for an estimate, and like what is capacity, like things that sound so simple, they're actually really hard to get a straight answer to. And those things, when you start thinking about all the dependencies, like what's a billable hour and what are all the different things that influences, like it influences how we think about utilization. It influences how we think about, like average billable rate. It influences all these different things, and defining those and coming up with a way that all those metrics work together when you really start to peel back the onion and ask those hard questions, it can get overwhelming really quickly. And, of course, I didn't have all the answers when we first started working together. Today, I like to think that I do, but I'm sure there's things that, I'll get tested on over time and my opinions will shift on. But that, I feel like that is an important thing for everyone to understand, is like almost nobody that I've talked to has a good answer for all of those questions or feels like they really have all that stuff together. And it's okay that that's the case. It's really complex stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, I think one thing that's always been just wonderful for me is the way that we collaborate around numbers and the definitions of those terms, because I think we're both pretty nerdy about it, and it's fun to be like, wait, what exactly is a billable hour, or what exactly is capacity, and to know that we have to define those terms really, really well and both be on the same page about them if we're going to have our metrics be really meaningful. And then, and therefore the decisions that we make from those metrics effective.
Absolutely. And even creating alignment, like I've seen lots of organizations where internally they've got several different definitions of the same term. And you can imagine that gets really challenging. That's going to do it for part 1 of this 2-part series with Josh Lowman at Gold Front. Make sure you tune into our next episode where we're going to go deeper into Josh's learnings, experiences, and results after installing these systems for operations and metrics in his business. Well, that's all for today's episode, but it doesn't have to be the end of your learning journey. Make sure you subscribe to our show so you never miss another episode. And if you want to get access to more great resources, be sure to check out parakeeto.com, where we've got tons of other free resources, including the Agency Profitability Toolkit, which is loaded with templates, checklists, and training videos to help you improve your agency's profitability fast. And of course, if you like the show, it would really help us out if you could leave us a review and share this with someone else who you think might get value, so you can help us serve more people. So with that, thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode.